Hi, everyone, and welcome to Course of Control Consulting. Y'all know me, Christine, Dr. Christine Cochiola. I'm so glad to be here. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a doctorate in clinical social welfare where I research the experiences of both adult and child victims of coercive control. I've been doing this work since the age of 19. I didn't recognize it in my own personal life with my own coercive controller, and I didn't recognize how harmed my children were and for how long. So I put on my clinician hat and I said, how am I going to support my children? What can I do differently? How can I really show them clearly a path to freedom? I always say protective parents are their children's saving grace, and they are showing their children a path to freedom, freedom from the coercive controller. So you are here for a very short webinar, hopefully within 30 minutes, and it is called Reignited Attachment. You guys know where to find me on social media, and hopefully you're following me. And also, you can find me on my website, iknowyourheart.com. And I am on Instagram, Dr. Cochiola _ course of control, and other places. So, reignited attachment. I know some of you don't see your children or see them very little. I'm so sorry. It's important that you are ready and waiting for them. That's what's the most important thing. And sometimes that's about growing around our grief. That's really about us not moving on with our life without our children, but certainly moving on in our life and developing. And it's called post-traumatic growth because the trauma that you've been through is so heartbreaking. Our children need to see us strong. They need to see us moving forward, not forward like, oh, I don't need you, but forward that I'm here, ready and waiting. And I'm moving on with my life and having as good of a life as I can without you in it right now. Some of you do have a relationship with your children. I always say that we have a lifeboat and we are navigating the stormy seas of the coercive controller. We might have one child in the lifeboat, maybe two. We might have one out to sea, and we're ready with a lifeline for that child. But the two in that lifeboat, we have to keep there. We have to keep them very steady and work diligently to ensure that they don't go overboard, because the coercive controller is always working to send our children overboard. So I'm just going to go over some things. This is not a long webinar, but about reignited attachment. First of all, the brain has neuroplasticity. The brain can heal. Children are resilient. So many individuals are able to overcome trauma in their lives, and most often it is because of a protective parent or some caretaker in their life. These children in our world, these coercively controlled children, are victims of the same abuse you experienced. Coercive control by someone they perhaps love, or someone that they feel very close to or they trust. We must treat our children as the trauma victims that they are. We must move towards reigniting their attachment to us and strengthening it if it's already available to us. We have to work on strengthening it all the time. That goes back to the lifeboat. Who's in the lifeboat? Keep working on those kiddos, because the coercive controller is always working to diminish you in some way. You are your child's saving grace. You can show them a path to freedom. A little trigger warning: this webinar is for educational purposes only and is not a replacement for therapy. The content may be difficult and perhaps triggering for some. Please be sure to take a pause if need be, and also time for self-care following the webinar. If immediate support is needed, participants should call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. The learning outcomes. We're going to develop a further awareness of why our children may align or acquiesce to the coercive controller, and we're going to create an awareness of several strategies protective parents can use to enhance our children's ego resiliency, giving them greater agency with others, including the coercive controller. Fracturing the attachment. The coercive controller is working double time. He's got a little chisel and a hammer, and he is constantly trying to fracture that attachment. And he's been doing it well before you left, well before you even knew he was doing it. The children were always objects to him, and they were objects to control, as were you. And so he knew in his head, this is how these coercive controllers work, is that he had to ensure that if anything were to happen in the relationship, that he could more readily gain control of them. And so he is working diligently. You have to work. He works double time. You have to work triple time. As Dr. Evan Stark states, like carpenter ants devouring a house, there are a variety of ways that this occurs. I'll talk about several major ways in this webinar. Again, I cannot unpack it all in a brief webinar. Most children who have been indoctrinated or are being groomed for indoctrination, gaslighting a child into a false narrative against the protective parent, will exhibit traumatic reactions against the one parent they believe they can control. So I want you to think about our children as soldiers. They're lining up. They're doing exactly what the abuser, the coercive controller wants them to do, because if they don't, they're going to be rejected just like you were. They're going to be discarded like you were. They're going to be diminished just like you were. So what do? Well, they can either choose you or the coercive controller. And if you have lost agency, if you are not someone they feel they can rely on because of all of the trauma you've been through, they're going to be more readily willing to align with the abuser. Now, of course, if the abuser is giving them everything they want, is not, is certainly not creating structure in their lives, that's all the more reason for them to align. Their children, that's what they're going to do. So they start to ask themselves subconsciously, this is all subconscious, but who can I control? And it becomes you. They want to exert control over you because that's what they're taught to do. They cannot control the coercive controller. And so they're taught that you might be betraying their trust, that you are not someone that loves them as much as they thought you did, that you don't care about them as much as their sibling. And so they are in a state of intense fear. Their reaction is to project that fear onto those around them. And they cannot do that with the coercive controller. They are being primed to feel betrayed and rejection by you. And this has, again, been going on long before you ever imagined. So one of the things the coercive controller does, we're going to talk about 3 major things that they do, is splitting. They create this, they either love or hate. And so, what happens with children is they learn that they could really, they grow up believing they can trust you. And then all of a sudden, what the coercive controller has done has created this splitting. So now they may want nothing to do with you. They might be very angry with you when they never were. They might call you names when they never did. The coercive controller sees the protective parent as all bad because you've done this horrible thing. You've left them, right? And so they are teaching the children this black and white thinking, all bad or all good, very superior or very inferior. There are no gray areas. People are winners or losers. This way of thinking is quickly ascribed to the vulnerable child. It just becomes part of who they are. Children who have learned that they are either good or bad to the coercive controller are living in this place of feeling very negative self-worth. These are the children we see on the playground, perhaps bullying another child, perhaps maybe acquiring negative feelings about certain children on the playground, whether it's because of race or socioeconomic status. That's that black and white thinking that the coercive controller is trying to train the child to align with, because that's how he compromises them. People who do that don't have good self-worth. So our children become compromised. They don't have agency. They don't have a voice. They can't stand up for themselves against the coercive controller. Which side of the coercive controller did you want to be on? Did you want to be on their good side, or did you walk around in eggshells for a long time? Right? So what do our children want to do? They want to just try to be on the good side. Coercive controllers also use triangulation. This is where they basically attempt to get the child's support, and they do so in a way that creates a really inappropriate enmeshment. We never want to put children in the middle, but oftentimes what coercive controllers will do is, beyond putting them in the middle, is they will make the child almost their caretaker. Like, look what happened to us because of your mother, or all the money that was spent because of your mother, or now I have to go back to court because your mother did this, right? And so the child ends up feeling sorry for the perpetrator, the coercive controller, simply because they don't have any other narrative, because frankly, you're probably taking the high road. And so I am not a lawyer, and I certainly am not giving any legal advice here. We never disparage the coercive controller, though. We never do that, because that's exactly what the coercive controller is doing to us all the time. And we don't want to be anything like that. We want to appear very different to our children. But giving them clarity and sharing with them that something isn't true, that what they heard maybe isn't true, may be helpful, and you have to decide what's best for your situation. Knowing that the child is really being made to care for this abuser is very triggering for protective parents, but also we have to understand how harmful that is to our child's ego, how harmful it is to their development, to their having agency. This enmeshment is extremely inappropriate. I talk about much more in detail about this in the protective parenting program. So why does the child align? Again, this is the third, like they become blind to betrayal. Our children align with the parent who has more power. Think about a war, right? Think about the Holocaust and how horrifying it was that so many people lined up and followed along with what Hitler was suggesting. I'm I don't think it's too exaggerative to say that that's what the coercive controller does to our children. There is a need or a desire to align with this person. Literally, compliance is an act of survival. The idea of loving a parent being aggressive, the idea of a loving parent being aggressive or harmful is incongruent with the way that children expect a parent to be. They just don't expect it and they don't want to believe it. And so then someone says, like moms say to me, well, then why do they believe it about me? Well, because you're not as much of a threat. And we don't want you to be a threat, but you're not as much of a threat. The coercive controller is a threat to them. That's why they're so dysregulated. That's why they're living in fear. It's easier to be blind to betrayal. If they don't, they will be rejected as you were, abandoned. If they don't, they know what happens. They've seen how you've been treated. And so, they've also been taught again that you don't love them implicitly, that they are soldiers to this coercive controller. Add in that this abuse is often very covert and the developing brain doesn't even recognize it as abuse. I mean, this is all so very complicated. So, trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance. I mean, we all were trauma bonded to our abusers and we experienced cognitive dissonance. We really did want to disassociate from the negative thoughts of that person being horrible. I talk about this in my podcast, Perfect Prey, this idea that, nobody wants to believe, people in these relationships don't want to believe that someone could be this horrible. Just don't. So that creates betrayal blindness for a child who depends on a caregiver for basic survival. And maybe they depend on two caregivers, but that's still their dad. And again, I'm talking about this in relationship to it being a father. I know sometimes mothers can do this, but it is a gender depression. And we know it happens more to women than it does to men, simply by the nature of the patriarchal norms that are set up in society. So children know that withdrawing may actually be at odds with ultimate survival goals, particularly when the caregiver responds to withdrawal by further reducing caregiving or increasing violence in the case of our children, maybe diminishing them, discarding them, further betraying them. In such cases, the child's survival would be better ensured by being blind to the betrayal and isolating the knowledge of the event. This is why children, again, they don't recognize so many challenging, difficult circumstances as abusive, and they certainly forget the negative experiences at a greater rate. So they remain engaged with the caregiver. The betrayal trauma occurs when the people or institutions on which a person depends for survival significantly violates the person's trust or well-being. I'm supposed to testify tomorrow for a reunification camp, meaning against reunification camps. I mean, talk about betrayal trauma, being forced into the care and being forced to reunify with an abuser. I mean, it's just absolutely mind blowing. And I just don't understand the system that we're living in, but that's a whole nother conversation. So, to our children, sometimes they think we've betrayed them because of all the false narratives they've heard. So, they're not blind to that because, again, we aren't withdrawing our love. And that's so important. They need to know that we love them unconditionally, no matter how they treat us. Dr. Bruce Perry, his book, What Happened to You, and he really unpacks trauma and brain development. So many great researchers do, but I really particularly like this visual. So in typical development, survival is, certainly there, but it's that reptilian part of our brain isn't activated frequently when children feel safe and they're able to learn to regulate and they have social engaging experiences and they have healthy emotional development and emotional intelligence. And because of that, they can process what's happening to them. They can process it. So I guess think about someone who grew up really healthy in their life, quote unquote. They had all that they needed in childhood overall. And then maybe something horrifying happens to them when they're 22. They're able to cognitively process what happened to them because that cognitive processing works well because they developed in a healthy way. For our children, they're constantly in survival mode. They're in that reptilian lower part of the brain, ready to react. Regulation does not come easy. It's very challenging. Social and emotional challenges happen. The coercive controller may isolate them from the things that they love. The coercive controller may certainly perhaps make them not want to play soccer when they always played soccer, make them think that, oh, going to their aunt's house on the maternal side of the family is a waste of time. That aunt is always so weird, or we didn't like her anyway. And so the emotional growth is really not stabilized. And the cognition. So, how could we ever expect this child to understand they're being abused? How? When they are literally constantly in this survival mode and their social and emotional ability to process things is not there. Cognitive processing is off the map or very minute. It's enough to get them maybe through school. I mean, so we have, all different responses to trauma, and some children become perfectionists and they're awesome at cognitively processing math or reading or doing well in school because that's where they hyper focus due to their trauma. So, knowing that this is how our children are reacting, I think is helpful. And it's how you reacted in this situation, too. Our children are like in a den with a wolf. Behavior is the language of trauma. Our child will show us how they feel before they will tell us how they feel. And these cognitive processing issues make it challenging. So, what's 4 ways to move towards reignited attachment? Knowing first and foremost, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's exhausting. You're already a trauma victim. You're already overwhelmed. And I'm asking you to do something else. But I promise you, I hear all of the time with the moms that I work with that they see shifts. Shifts are occurring in their lives with their children, children who they've had very little contact with, children that they see regularly, but that are coming home very dysregulated. They see shifts. So, what's our parenting goal? That my child doesn't go into survival mode every time they're around me, because they go into survival mode every time they're around the coercive controller for sure. And when they come home, they're so dysregulated that they are projecting that entirely onto us, and we need to give them calm. One of the strategies that works is if we are authoritative in our parenting, that we are giving children agency, that they know that there are clear roles and expectations in the family system, and that we are open to communication. Here's the problem. Well, first of all, let me say authoritative. Authoritative is easy to remember because it rhymes with give. But here's the problem. The coercive controller is authoritarian. So anytime that you actually try to retain control of your child, and I always say this is why it's so important to pick our battles. We choose 1 out of 10 things that they've done wrong today to highlight, because they are working in a place of consistent shame. They have shame for the way they treat you. They have shame because the coercive controller is diminishing their agency and their self-confidence and their self-worth. So they are working from a place of shame. It is so important that we don't correct them, but that we just connect as much as possible. Connect, connect, connect. So the coercive controller may parent authoritarian, certainly was authoritarian with you, certainly was authoritarian in that home, right? And so there is very strict punishment, one-way communication. There is no ability to communicate about what might be going on. Everything's parent driven. There's no agency for the children. However, lots of these coercive controllers may be authoritarian some of the time, or maybe not even any of the time, and they might simply be very permissive. They may allow the child to drive. They may give the child virtually carte blanche for whatever they want to do. These are issues with phone and curfews and certainly, if the child says, I don't want to go to that sport anymore, the course of controller is so excited about that because that isolates a child. Or they may make a child with authoritarian go to a sport that they don't want to go to anymore simply because it's what the course of controller wants. And certainly these parents can be neglectful. They certainly cannot, they are may not be supervising child. They may be putting the children at risk. They may be allowing them to do things that are harmful. These are all the ways that parenting can be harmful to children. I need you guys to be authoritative. And it's really hard when there's another parent being permissive. So it's not authoritarian. You are not the complete opposite. You are authoritative. You're coming up with rules and guidelines in your house together as best you can. Number two, empathic attunement. I can't say enough about this. It is really important that we take the time to be intentional and think about where our child is at in the moment that they might be behaving in a way that is dysregulated, or that they're really quiet, or that they're super excited. Whatever is going on with our children, we have to become extremely attuned to them and be prepared to respond in the way that they need us to respond. That's synchronizing, right? So we have focused attention. We're connected. We are attuned. We are facilitating intersubjectivity, like really trying our best to see what is going on with them and experiencing it as them. We are immersion into another person. That is truly about empathy, is about not only putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, but putting ourselves in someone else's shoes as them, like literally experiencing the experience as them. Rational sense making, emotional cognitive sensing, sensing what's going on with them emotionally and cognitively. And this helps us to connect. It helps us with focused attention. So it's really about being really intentional. I call it CIA. We have to be creative, intentional, and authentic in how we behave with them, because now may not be the right time to ask them to clean their room. Now may not be the right time to ask about dad's girlfriend. Now may not be the right time to tell them that something upset you. Just now may not be the right time. We only know that if we're attuned to them. So here's an acronym I came up with for number three. It's different than gray rocking or yellow rocking. It's with a level of empathy. We have to train our children to learn how to empathize. So we need to be very empathic with them. The course of controller is teaching our children not to empathize. So we need to really teach them to empathize. And so we really need to, I guess, for lack of a better word, engage with them in a way that resolves conflict more quickly. And so remember that for the course of controller, the best thing that he wants is for the child to be argumentative with us, right? To create conflict. And remember that if their ego is compromised, the more that we argue with them or try to debate or explain, the more that we are enhancing that really unhealthy part of their ego that he is trying to actually enhance. So we don't want to work with him. We want to work against that. We want to counteract that. So I'm sure you recall at some point that you would over explain with the coercive controller, and he loved it. It was like a pig in mud, my brother used to say. So if we do that with our children, it's not that they love it, but it actually is fueling that little furnace inside of them that the coercive controller is building. A furnace that is going to create a mini coercive controller, a mini narcissist, which is what we all don't want, right? So VEST 2.1K, validate with empathy, E for empathy, and a soft S, soft tone, T. Validate with empathy and a soft tone. I'm so sorry that happened. That must be frustrating. Say they stubbed their toe, or they left their backpack at school, or they're mad because dad was late. I'm sorry that happened. That must be frustrating. Now they came home really upset with you though, because who are they going to project that on, right? And so they say to you something like, oh, sure, you're sorry. You're never sorry. You made this happen. And your response is you have to come up with two that are basically identical. That's not true. I don't agree. So they come at you the first time and you say, that's not true. And they come at you the second time and you say, I don't agree, honey. And then the third time, you notice how it's very succinct sentences? It's short, it's succinct, it's not an explanation. And then the third time they come to you, if they do, which they will, it's a point one. It's a disengage in a kind way, in a very kind way. Sweetheart, I have a phone call I've got to take. Sure, you do. You have to take a phone call now, right? Yeah, I do. And then you go take the phone call. Or you say, I've got to go take a shower. And then they come banging on the shower door. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're leaving. You're leaving. And they try to harass you. And you say, you turn on the shower and you get in the shower. I don't care what you do. You disengage. You might say, I'm going out for a walk. They might say, oh, you're running away. You might say, hey, I'm happy to talk about this at 6. I just can't talk about it now. Right now is not a good time. You want to come for a walk with me? They say no. Okay, no problem. So, do you want to talk at 6? They say no. Okay, no problem. They say yes. Please show up at 6 to have the conversation. Vest 2.1K. Positive memories and protective parts. I can't stress enough. You have to grow around this grief. There is so much grief in this. It doesn't go away. We grow around our grief. And when we grow around it, our children get to see us in a different light. They don't see us broken. They don't see us as victims. They see us as strong. They see us with personal power. This also means surrounding as many protective parts as we can around us. Engage family and friends into your home. You may have a teenager who never comes out of their room. When you have a get together with family, that's okay. You still have that get together. When your mother-in-law or your mother says, or your mother-in-law, maybe you have a new partner says, why isn't that child coming out? You say, yeah, today's not a good day. That's all. We don't talk badly about our children. We don't excuse it. We just say it's not a good day. We don't expect everyone to understand the compromised situation our children are in and that they have so much anxiety. They are told to hate everything that is good in their life. Everything. Their favorite teacher, their favorite school, their favorite grandma, their favorite cousins. They are taught to hate all of those things. So we need to really pull in all of those things as much as possible. That's not the time to say, oh, they don't like them, so we're not going to have them over. Actually, it's the time to pull them in. So I fill my cup. And when I do, I fill my child's cup. So some examples might be, it's silly, but tell the neighbor you will pay them to walk their dog. And then in other words, your neighbor hires your child to walk their dog once a day. What neighbor wouldn't want that? And you pay the neighbor to do it. Now, maybe you don't have the money to do that. Maybe you can barter with them. Or maybe you can walk the dog with your child. Maybe your child's young enough that they'll let you walk the dog with them. And those are moments and memories, positive memories. Animals always enhance those situations, right? I have one client who bought an e-bike for her child because he refused to go bike riding anymore because he didn't like to work so hard. These kids who are addicted to their phones, right? He didn't want to work so hard on the e-bike. So what did he do? He basically said, no, I'm not riding my bike anymore with you. And mom knew that was such an important part for them. She was able to find a used e-bike, and he rides an e-bike and she rides a regular bike, and they still go biking all the time. Perhaps working for a local animal shelter. There are also horse farms that are always looking for somebody to help groom their horses. Equestrian therapy is so, so helpful for our children. Any animal therapy is. Use the GLAM technique. Give calm, listen more, ask less, attune to their needs, and move on to something when things get a little tenuous. We do not need to fix or address every single problem. There are too many problems, and our children are dealing with the shame of these problems. The idea is to not really heighten their shame. We can't heighten their shame. We are trying to diminish their shame, to let them be who they authentically are. They don't think they can be themselves with us. They've been turned against us. So we have to allow them to be authentically themselves. And that comes with connection and not shame. And we never intentionally shame them. Of course we don't. But if we're going to call them out on a behavior, we have to be really attuned to how they might react to that. And we have to figure out a way to do it in a way. We have to figure out a way to do it where they don't feel as much shame. So I did just want to show you this flow chart I made. It's on my website. The left side is the complete flow chart, the right side is just the manifestations of trauma. And what I talk about in the blue panels is the ways that protective parents can really support their children. We can begin to see them as the coercively controlled children that they are and the trauma that they have experienced. We can elevate ourselves in the relationship with them. We can show them we have personal power. We can show them we're different than the coercive controller describes us. We are different than how we are different than the coercive controller describes us, and we are different than how they expect us to be. We are not broken. We are strong, that we have personal power, that we will give them clarity when possible. We will give them clarity, and we will also, when they're ready, support their getting trauma trained support in therapy where they can actually begin to talk about what's happened to them. All of this will lead to post traumatic growth. Again, this is on my website. So, in closing, I just wanted to do this 1 minute self care video. And before you hang up, please stay on the line. I have a couple of more things to share with you. So, again, thank you for staying with me in the webinar and staying to the end. The hotline and text start 88788 are ways to get support. Also, the National Sexual Assault Hotline. I also wanted to let you know that I do have a protective parenting program. You probably are aware of that. I do give out badges, and those badges are things that people show in court to say that they've done a protective parenting course. I also have a trauma informed coach certification for coaches who want to learn more about coercive control and how to be trauma informed in that process, and also a clinician certification program that we'll be running in October. The coach certification program runs periodically throughout the year. The clinician certification program will be running again in October. Um, so, I have information about those on my website. I also run a support group, Saving Grace, because I believe that all protective parents are their children's saving grace, and kept very small to less than 8 people so that there's enough opportunity, an hour and a half a week for people to get the support that they need. And then knowing that the protective parenting program is really about processing and validating your trauma and your child's trauma, elevating you, the protective parent, and then healing in synergy with your child. These are all the things that we do in this Venn diagram in the protective parenting program. Finally, my copyright. Also, if you could take a picture of this QR code and do a quick evaluation, I would greatly appreciate it. I love your feedback. And then finally, a QR code if you are able to make a donation to the Coachiola Course of Control Foundation, where I give out scholarships to protective moms seeking support through the protective parenting program. I am so grateful you stayed, and thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to hearing from you. Bye, everyone.